if not all of you have seen his shows, know who he is, and so I will try not to take too much airtime from John. But I do want to say a few words about what John means to those of us in the freedom movement. He's now at Fox Business News with his weekly show Stossel, his blog, his website. He is bringing into mainstream media a set of ideas that have never really had a home before. And before Fox News, he did the same role in the even more inhospitable environment of ABC News, where I know something of the kind of S-T that John had to put up with from the many liberal people who were surrounding him in his environment. And yet he prevailed. He produced at ABC a number of specials during his time there. I'm going to tell one little story, or actually I'll tell two stories. One story is from, I believe, the very first special John did, Are We Scaring Ourselves to Death? This was in the early 90s, and I had the privilege of being in the audience. It was at Seton Hall University in a theater in the round setting, and in the central arena, John was interviewing a mix of people, some libertarians. David Bose was there, Stephen Breyer, who, the Supreme Court Justice, was there, and but there were also a number of regulators, because it was about the role of regulation in embodying our fears and preventing us from taking certain risks. And John did the most brilliant thing I'd ever seen in that kind of environment. He posed to one of the regulators the following question: suppose someone came to you for approval for this new power source that we could provide to people. It's actually a gas. It's colorless, it's odorless, it's piped into homes under high pressure, it's highly explosive. Would this get approval these days? And I'm sitting in the audience thinking, oh, come on, it's natural gas. This is such a slow pitch. And they fell for it. They said no. So I thought, a guy who can hit that kind of ball out of the park is my kind of guy. I also know from working on other projects with John that we know him as someone who has opened the mainstream media to a point of view that had rarely been represented before. He's done it with tremendous courage, as I said, and with great integrity. But having worked with him on other projects, I know that he is also a consummate professional journalist. He fact checks everything, even among his friends. On one set where I happened to be again present, there was also an incident where he was filming and he said, stop. There's an airplane. It's interfering with the audio. And the sound engineer told me later, I didn't hear that till like 15 seconds after John heard it. He is a perfectionist. The quality of his programs are the product not only of his courage and his insight and perspective, but also of his skill as a journalist and a television producer and spokesman. So it is my great pleasure, again, to introduce John. Please come up.
Thank you, David. That's very kind. I appreciate the compliment. And I should also say that my third special, David was the star. It was called Greed. Should have been called Enlightened Self-Interest, but I thought Greed with the picture of a pig would get a rating. And I try to educate people. David educates me. And during the interview, he said, who did more for the world? Michael Milken or Mother Teresa? This threw me, and left, and we thought about it. Michael Milken at the time has gone to jail for securities fraud, but he invented junk bonds. And I don't know if he really did anything wrong, but he created millions of jobs. And Mother Teresa helped thousands of people. When she died, her work died with her. All those jobs continue to exist and serve us well. And one of the reasons I was perfectly happy to leave ABC, where we had a larger audience, people used to say to me, why don't you go to Fox? And I would say, well, I don't want to preach to the converted. And also at 2020, we got the Greed Show had 15 million viewers. And Fox had 100,000 viewers. But over time, that's evened out quite a bit. Now 2020, which mostly does sex murders, because that's what, this is the market, sadly. This is what appeals to the young people who, the policy that most of us old folks like, the advertisers don't want us. They want those 25-year-old women. They get 5 million, and Bill O'Reilly with a repeat will get about 5 million, so Fox is now equal. And I get to talk about what I want to talk about. Well, at ABC, they didn't let me do that. But more importantly, that Greed Show now, through a charity that Andrea Rich started, is in high school classrooms, and every year is watched by about 10 million high school kids. So double the audience in 2020. "15 years later, these kids are still hearing David Kelly say those things. Unfortunately, they also now say, who's Michael Milken? Who's Mother Teresa? But since we're here to celebrate Atlas Shrugged, there'll be a lot of love for Ayn Rand, so let me start with some hate, just to be fair and balanced. The review from the New York Times in 1957. It howls in the reader's ear and beats him about the head to secure his attention. Then, when it has him subdued, it harangues him for page upon page. The book is written out of hate. I mean, what's with these people? More recently, 2009, a Business Week debate room. You'd think it was a joke when the global economy is collapsing because of greed, that anyone might turn seriously to the purple prose of the crypto-fascist Ayn Rand. You go to Amazon. Somebody's called it excruciatingly awful. I find it remarkably silly. The story is preposterous. Oh, sorry, that was Whittaker Chambers. Amazon, it's better. Amazon, gag. This has got to be one of the worst books ever written. Never have I read something that made me hate life and everything to do with it. So, I don't get it. What's this hatred about? I'm surrounded by it. I do stories on TV that seem like common sense to me, and people on the left, and they're all around me, I live in Manhattan, there's just this level of hatred. So I wrote that book to try to explain it. I think it's because markets are not intuitive to people. It is just intuitive, and this is relevant with the Obamacare fight, that the central planners can do better. That you get these smart people, they went to Harvard, life is complex, I can't get my brain around how you build a sewage treatment plant myself. It makes sense to have the experts in Washington direct things. You understand that that doesn't work well, that central planning doesn't work, but it's not intuitive. The communist intellectuals didn't get it. Soviet Union survived 70 years. This just makes sense to people. And of course, that's what's led to the growth of government. Here it is spread out by population. And now we have more. We have Obamacare. And everywhere, we got Mayor Bloomberg saying ban big soft drinks. And constantly new rules. Nobody ever wants to repeal anything. And they can always make a good argument. People are dying. We're going to make them safer. Just as one example, briefly. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It was created, and they passed some rules that their argument was persuasive. These factory owners are self-interested. All they care about is their own profit. They don't care if they kill their workers. And so we have to pass a few rules, and this just makes sense to people. And of course, the few rules are now a rule book that's this thick so that even the lawyers who specialize in it can't understand it. But they can point to this chart that shows how many lives they've saved. Look how workplace deaths and injuries have tracked down about the same slope since the beginning of OSHA. And this is why our side loses, because they can make this argument. Fortunately, in this case, some researchers went back to before the creation of OSHA and were able to show this. But this is just harder to explain to people, that in a free society, things get better on their own. They get better because as we get richer, we care more about safety. We can afford to care more about safety. We get smarter. When there's an accident, we make adjustments so the accident's less likely to happen next time. Even the most venal, greedy employer cares about safety, if only because it costs him money to retrain the workers to replace the ones he kills. Things get better on their own, but it's just tough to explain that to people. So I wrote this book trying to do it. And I thank you for all you have done to try to explain this to people. I think we should go right to the panel. And David, am I introducing them and they're coming up? Is that how that works? Okay. Well, why don't you come up? First, Bob Poole, the founder of Reason. Grover Norquist from Americans for Tax Reform. And someone I assume fewer of you know, Alexander McCobin of Students for Liberty. I guess you know him. He got bigger applause. So, Bob, let me start with you. I should say I won 19 Emmy Awards as a consumer reporter bashing business, and I only became a libertarian, unlike you who were smarter than I. It took me a long time of watching regulation fail to start to search around for some other way of thinking about these things. And what made it possible after I went to the conservative press, and they just wanted to go to war against everybody in the world and police the bedroom, and I didn't love that. And then I discovered Reason magazine, which Bob helped start. Now he's moved on to specializing in transportation. And well, let me just start by turning it to Atlas Shrugged. So how did it impact you? Is that why you became the person who made my life?
It had a big effect on me, John. I read it as a
Are
student.
you Mike here?
I'm Mike, but maybe it's not. The green light is on.
Is he now on?
Am I on now? Testing, 1, 2, 3. All right.
Okay.
I read Atlas Shrugged as a college student at MIT in the summer of 1964 on a summer job. And it was the right time for me to read it. I had resisted reading it in high school because I was afraid that would damage my religious faith. But by the time I was in my third year at MIT, I had read Aristotle, I'd read Hume, I'd read John Locke, and Hume on miracles in particular was a big. So I was prepped for Atlas Shrugged. And it just was it was the kind of eye-opening thing that a lot of people have said it was. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, other than just slightly change my political and ideological views to be more focused. But it really started my path toward wanting to do something to make the world a freer place and more pro-freedom.
And what do you mean you felt you knew enough then that you would be able to resist it? In 1964, was enough on the radar screen that it was considered some kind of poison you had to resist?
It was mostly the religious thing. The friends in high school who would urged me to read it were all were non-religious by that point, and they said Ayn Rand is an atheist, and if you read this book, all that stuff will fall away. And I didn't want that to happen at the time. But by the time the two years of MIT Modern Western Ideas and Values had sunk in, I was all right. I was ready for a rational approach to looking at the world, and the framework was there then for me to accept it. That was the difference.
And when you talk about doing things for liberty, few people have done more than Ayn Rand or Grover Norquist. Not only at Americans for Tax Reform, it's not just about taxes. His book about the Leave Us Alone coalition is a way to think about it. It's hard to get these groups together, but leave us alone is certainly a good way to think about it. And he wades where few of us want to tread, which is into politics, and does it with good humor and openness to all sides. So what effect did Atlas, when did you find Atlas, and what effect did it have?
I read Atlas Shrugged and all of Rand's novels because I was tired of people coming up and telling me I was a Randian. And
they told you that before you had ever read anything by her?
Yeah, they said, oh, you're one of these people, the Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand. And so at some point I said, okay, college. I sat down and...
Harvard.
Yes. Luckily I didn't learn anything there. I sat down and read them all. So it's very interesting because and when I read Atlas Shrugged, I thought, well, this makes a great deal of sense, and it wasn't shocking. I think it was so much there in terms of people's communicating, and it was, I mean, I'd seen it in reflected issues and subjects before and hadn't read sort of the original text, but then did, and I became a little more sympathetic to the parasites afterwards than before, but otherwise it didn't have too much calming effect.
The book made you more sympathetic to the Western... Joe. Okay.
I already didn't like them.
And Alexander McCobin, Students for Liberty, I didn't know you all knew about the group, but it is extraordinary in that there were always the college Democrats. In my day, that's all there were. Then there were the college Republicans, who were these sort of oddballs who wore ties on a college campus. And now there are libertarians, and I have made it an annual thing to tape one of my shows with their group, and it's just wonderful. They are smarter than the Democrats or the Republicans. They're really into this. They're better looking. They're cheerful. So, Alexander, how did you come to this, and how did you come to Atlas Shrugged?
Well, is my microphone on? Yeah. Great. I typically talk about the start of Students for Liberty by referencing Atlas Shrugged, because for me, all of this began in 9th grade when my dad gave me a copy of Atlas Shrugged for my birthday. Now, I was, admittedly, he didn't do this out of nowhere. I was one of those individuals who, by that age, was asking for John Locke, John Rawls to read for my birthday presents, and he said, okay, if you're going to read this stuff, you need to read Ayn Rand as well. And it was an absolutely defining moment in my life. It took me a month to read over the summer, but once I closed the last page, I said to myself, this is what I've always believed put into words. Spent the rest of high school reading as much as I could, not just with Rand, but being introduced to other philosophers like T. McCobin and Robert Nozick and so forth. So by the time I went off to college at the University of Pennsylvania, I was incredibly excited to be surrounded by so many other smart individuals, people who would believe in liberty, and maybe even other objectivists out there to converse with. But for the first 2 years on campus, I didn't meet a single other libertarian, much less an objectivist. And I decided to take a chance. I figured, okay, I either need to just give up and become a socialist, or start a group and see if there are others out there. And the success of the Penn Libertarians in its first year laid the foundations for Students for Liberty later on.
And the success was?
We had over 200 members on our listserv by the end of 1 year, just by starting to hold events and putting ourselves out there. And admittedly, Atlas Shrugged influenced the start of the Penn Libertarians if you look at our old logo, which was an image of Atlas holding up the Penn Shield. So we put ourselves out there from the very beginning.
And you continue to grow. It's gone last year 500 schools, now 700?
780 groups in our network now. And
And of these thousands of kids, how many got it first through Atlas Shrugged or through Ayn Rand? It's mainly the Fountainhead and Atlas, right?
for the most part, I would say there are two dominant influences in students to bring them to the ideas of liberty. Ayn Rand perhaps is the most historical and most prominent one, although admittedly we are seeing Ron Paul introducing a lot of people to the ideas. And then once people learn about Ron Paul, they want to learn about the philosophy more in depth, and then they go on to read Ayn Rand or Austrian economics and become more ingrained in the movement.
And I should say I didn't read it until I was 47 years old. Wow. And had already joined the movement and was just astonished. How could this woman know this stuff 50 years ago? It's exactly what's happening now. And that was a shock. But I sort of raced through this because I'd like to leave time for questions from any of you, for these two leaders of the movement and longtime leaders and a third future leader of the movement. What questions do you have for them? Yes, in the red shirt. And why don't you say who you are so your neighbors can get to know you here?
My name is Hanania. I come from Israel.
Israel, where socialists, where there's just everybody knows. You got to take care of people. Government has to do it all. There's one libertarian economist who's 80 years old, and he gets ignored. What's his name? Can't think of. He's wonderful. But there's a microphone for you. Go ahead. There's a mic.
Thank you. My question is really to the whole panel. How do you view the progress of your diffusion of ideas in terms of your particular endeavors? Thank you.
Well, I'll start. I think the progress of the ideas has been enormous. I mean, when we started Reason Magazine, it was like a voice crying in the wilderness. There was not working.
Guy in the back will.
All right. Okay. Am I on? Okay. All right. When we started Reason Magazine in 1968, 69.
Hold the thing up.
We were a voice crying in the wilderness. I mean, if you look at the editorial pages of newspapers, the libertarian kinds of ideas were just not represented at all. And I mean, it was like lighting one candle in the darkness was the way we felt. And well, I've been enormously impressed, having been at this for so many years, at how often our kinds of people appear on op-ed pages, even in the New York Times, and quoted in news stories in places like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and so forth. We are in the mainstream media, maybe not as much as we would like, but compared to 30 or 40 years ago, it's a night and day difference. And you know, we now have worldwide, there's about 100 free market think tanks. Even in China, there are free market think tanks. There's a network. Every single state in the United States has at least one state-based free market think tank. Some states have two, and in one case, three. So we've got a network now. We've got an infrastructure that simply was not even imaginable back in the 1960s and 1970s. So we've come a long way. I mean, it also used to be when you would find a book published that had libertarian kinds of ideas in it. It was a big celebration event. Yeah. And now, I mean, you get whole libraries full of books like this. Grover and other people, everybody's writing them. People are mainstream publishers publishing them. So, I mean, we certainly haven't won, but we have a beachhead established and an infrastructure established that is an enormous change over the last several decades.
And I would just add that it's not a steady change. It sort of looks more like this in that the last 3 years I suddenly see Matt Welch and Nick Gillespie all over the mainstream media where reason is in play for the first time.
I remember I was in college, Peter Farrar, great libertarian thinker, writer, policy guy, commenting to me, he said, Grover, 1977, I used to read every libertarian newsletter, magazine. I read them all. I don't even know them all anymore. And that was back then. Of course, now that's even more true, that you could be on top of the whole movement back then, not now.
Do you want to add that? Well, you're too new to know how it used to be.
Well, the one thing I would want to add is I think this is only going to become even more exponential when today's youth start to gain more positions of influence as they get older. I honestly believe that we're seeing a second wave of libertarianism or objectivism coming about right now, in large part because of what Bob mentioned, that there are institutions in place to support the development of these ideas in young libertarians and objectivists that weren't there before, that is giving them the training in how to be effective advocates of liberty, helping them perfect strategies of social change. And we're seeing so many more young people coming to these ideas because of these institutions and creating their own institutions and spreading these ideas much faster than any other ideology out there. At Students for Liberty, we're just trying to keep up with the demand for resources, and it is global. European Students for Liberty has taken off over the past year, so much so that the first European Students for Liberty conference we planned, we only expected 100 students to show up at. We had over 220. We're running 4 regional conferences there this fall. And we're getting so many requests from students in Latin America and Africa that we've accepted executive board members from those continents to spread these ideas. It's catching on right now, and this new generation of libertarians and objectivists are going to have the opportunity to build upon these ideas and spread them even faster than anything we've seen before. It's an incredibly exciting time to be in this movement.
And do you notice an uptick from the new Atlas Shrugged movies? That John Aguilaro's new one will come out shortly, which is an even bigger deal and hopefully more successful than the first. Do they read the book? Do any of them come from having seen the movie? Young people go to movies?
They still do, although that industry is trying to figure out how to stay alive, I think. But the movies are definitely bringing people in. More young people are starting to be exposed to her ideas, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to continue to do that we'll be talking about this weekend.
And I think the film's going to be a tremendous help because people who haven't read the book will see and hear about the film and the DVD if they didn't catch the film, and they'll go back and read the book.
Yes, sir.
My name is Walt Parker from Dallas. And my question...
You were looking around for applause for Dallas?
The mic.
Well, I usually do bring up, people ask what country I'm from, I will say Texas. I think most people in this room will agree that the only solution to the problems we have is actually to discover what liberty and free markets actually are. Saying that and pretty much knowing that 99.99% of people will never discover that, my question to you, put on your glasses for the future, when do you see that the United States will have a Soviet Union where the government does collapse?
There's a cheerful question. Who wants that?
Well,
Or just goes one into inevitable, I'm looking at the Rocky stuff like that.
Actually, I'm more optimistic because I do think there are a growing number, not just of younger people, but people who understand that freedom works and statism doesn't. And the solution, I mean, the Tea Party movement was an incredibly important grassroots operation of people who weren't Republicans or Democrats, but who just got scared by all that massive spending and the threat of control of energy and healthcare and so on, and they just said, this is nuts. That kind of movement is very difficult to create, and Obama, Reid, and Pelosi are nation's community organizers helped organize us out of sheer terror. And of course, it helps that not only did we have the example of the Soviet Union of what not to do, but now we have like all of Greece, which, and I'm sorry, all of Europe, actually. Europe used to be good because you could go and visit all the cool cathedrals and other stuff that people built with stolen money. But now you don't even, you can just watch it on TV as it collapses. It's sort of like the ghost of Christmas future, don't do that. Okay. So I think it's helpful because some people didn't see the Soviet Union as a realistic future for the United States. But I think a lot of people understand we could collapse slowly into France, and we'd stop bathing and shaving, and and that's a more realistic fear that you could. I mean, we're not going to turn into East Germany. We could become Greece. We could become Italy. We could become Spain. And having that out there, I think, is a very good cautionary tale. Then Obama is sort of the nearer enemy, the nearer threat. But having Europe misbehave, having the Soviet Union and East Germany take it to an extreme, I think helps warn us to move in a different direction. So I think it's very healthy. And I think we're going to do a U-turn on the road to serfdom. I think we'll do that and avoid the mistake that the rest of the world has been making.
I hope you're right, Robert. I just wanted to add that it's not only the federal government that is in big trouble. A lot of our state governments are very, very shaky. And I think we have our own domestic examples of Greece.
Exactly.
We have New York State, we have Illinois, we have California as object lessons, but we also have 47 other states, and some of them are in much better shape and much better managed. And this is a big strength of the United States. We're nowhere near as centralized as most of the countries in Europe. We actually have all these laboratories of democracy where failing ideas can be learned from and the lessons drawn in the states that have better government.
Europe has Greece. It doesn't have Wisconsin. We do.
Right. And we have Connecticut and Illinois, and I hope your optimism prevails. I would take the pessimistic side. Thomas Jefferson said it's the natural progress of things for government to grow and liberty to yield. And I see at my events, almost everyone there is either from a former Soviet republic, they get it, but Americans have forgotten about that, or they're small business owners who have run up against the regulatory wall, or people in finance who have the economic wisdom to see how things work. But most people are not small business owners. Most Americans don't try to do new things and run up against the wall of all these roadblocks. Will they pay attention when Greece goes? I don't think so. Maybe when Illinois and California go. David.
I just want to ask, and like give a position here with the question I know. The 800-pound gorilla in our immediate political circumstance is the Supreme Court decision about Obamacare. And one set of issues is, what does Atlas Shrugged tell us about this?
You'll never reach the world if you don't speak up.
He doesn't have a mic. What he was saying is, what does Atlas tell us about Obamacare, the big issue of the day?
John is not actually on the script. We had no plan for questions from the audience. You, sir.
Sorry.
But I think there's
That was the question. I'm a physician. Perfect segue. I'm a physician. I'm a plastic surgeon. We actually compete in the marketplace. We've got a great model for how to compete. We compete pretty well. And we compete for straight, I mean, we don't compete for insurance, we compete for American Express, Visa, and MasterCard. How do you see us being able to take a small segment of the physician population that I'm very concerned with the long-term?
For those of you who can't hear him, he's a plastic surgeon. He's adding to the Obamacare point. He's in part of the tiny pocket of American medicine that's not run by government, because if you want to go to a plastic surgeon, most of you are going to pay for it yourself. And the results are that the prices have gone down, the quality has gone up. The same is true of LASIK eye surgery, and I try to do these stories, I can't find many other examples. We went to Canada and we found one. We found you could get instant, quick care, the latest in tests, but you had the meow and bark.
Right.
Yes. Care is still private in Canada. I would argue that the Obamacare decision is just fine, that I don't want these things won based on legal technicalities. The public doesn't get that. And now we at least have a clean, fair fight. Do you want big government running health care or not? I hope people don't, but
I serve on the board of directors of the National Rifle Association, and I want to second your point that, thank you. I'm glad that the courts have generally recognized that the Second Amendment says what it says, but if we'd waited for the courts to read the Second Amendment, it would have been gone. We have to organize politically. Part of our life has to be living our life, and part of our life has to be defending against statism and the parasites, and that's just part of what you have to do. If you're going to have a field, you have to build a fence to protect it, and you need to spend some time keeping the other guys away from interfering with people's liberty. So we have to organize to defend for freedom. It'd be nice in a just world that the court would come down and say, don't do that every time they violate the Constitution, but we can't count on that, and it's more likely that the judges would do what they've done in the past, which is move in the wrong direction. So I'd rather work politically with the American people, and I think we're moving in the right direction as a people. The government's a lagging indicator.
Yeah, I think this Supreme Court decision is very bullish for the repeal of Obamacare. I think it gives real political wind to all of us who want to see it repealed, and all the survey data shows that more Americans want it repealed than want it to go into effect. And so this it makes it now it's a do or die issue, and I think that's going to have a big effect in November.
And if I can jump in real quick, the lesson from Atlas Shrugged with all this really ought to be that we can't rely on any individual to try and save this or any silver bullet strategy. It doesn't exist. John Galt himself didn't change the world on his own. He required getting all of the other intellectuals, the people who are rational, to join him in stopping the motor of the world.
He built a movement.
Exactly.
Yes, right.
And that's the only way we're going to preserve liberty, is if we're able to build a movement. We know we have the right ideas, but ideas don't change the world unless they have the right people advocating them. And that's what we need to make greater investments in to have more long-term, sustainable reform for freedom.
I'm Donovan Albanese. I'm also from Dallas, Texas. Do you know of any countries that, once they've established socialized medicine, have repealed it? Because what my concern is that there's so many socialized programs that once they're established, that people are so accustomed or used to them, whereas you try to pull the plug on it, there's so many people that are going to be hurt, or there's going to be some type of severe shock to the system, that it's almost like a patient that if you remove the drug, they're going to go into some type of convulsion. So, do you have any examples of other countries that
have any other countries repealed socialized medicine? I don't know of any.
I'm not sure.
I mean, we can barely repeal the mohair subsidy for World War I uniforms.
But a key point is that it really has not gone into effect yet. A few little bits and pieces have, but the vast majority of Americans are not getting any benefits out of it now. So it's important to repeal it before it really goes into effect, and you do get that lock-in effect.
I'm struck that I'm always looking for ways to communicate this, and I think the bill itself is a good prop, because it's 2,400 pages. And I carry it in all these shows. I'm struck that nobody else does, that this kind of micromanagement doesn't convey. And just a thought on the legal argument, the Commerce Clause, to depend on that, the original ruling years ago on the Commerce Clause was this farmer in Iowa, was Wickert versus Fillmore. And the guy was growing wheat on his own farm for his own use, and the court ruled, no, the feds can regulate that because it was the Depression of the time. They were in their brilliance trying to get wheat prices up, and they decided because he grew his own wheat, he wasn't buying it from the American supply, therefore it was interstate commerce and they could regulate it. So let's not rely on the court.
But one second, we have deregulated buses, trucking, airlines. I mean, there are a whole series
Under a liberal
of industries
Carter, yeah.
that were completely statist, I mean, fascist. Cartels. I mean, the government set prices, the government could determine whether you entered. And so there's been some fairly impressive liberalization of economics. Walking away from statism. You can walk away from statism. It's not impossible.
And I'll make a quick shameless plug. Last year, Students for Liberty published a book called The Morality of Capitalism, which David Kelly made a contribution to, and we printed 100,000 copies to send off to students for free to read. For this coming year, we're publishing a book called After the Welfare State that we're printing 125,000 copies of. So if you want to see the thoughts of a lot of individuals, intellectuals in Europe and the United States, and how they're grappling with what we can actually do to dismantle the welfare state in general and what comes after that, which is the big question on most people's minds, I would encourage you to stop by our booth and sign up so that we can send you the book as soon as it's printed in August.
Great. Yes, sir.
This is a similar question to what's being asked, but not since Calvin Coolidge has the government shrunk. I mean, there's a little bit, I think that's around Coolidge's time, that little dip there. Actually shrunk. I mean, you had some examples of deregulation. Do you see that it's possible politically in this next round, if we get a good group of people in there, and I think Romney may be amenable to being, pushed in that direction, do you think it's possible to actually eliminate sections of the government politically and cut it substantially and have it go in a different direction now?
Yeah, no, look, my optimism is not based on being optimistic. It's based on the fact that the House of Representatives, all but 4 Republicans last year, meaning a majority of the House, voted for Paul Ryan's budget plan.
Yep.
And that block grants all welfare programs, basically does for Medicaid and food stamps, and there are 200 different means-tested welfare programs. It takes the big 77 big ones and does for them what we did with welfare, which dropped the federal cost of welfare in half, dropped the number of people on aid to families with dependent children in half. That's a huge shift there. You move that out to the states, 50 states competing. A lot of those programs are going to disappear because states won't continue them. Others will simply be run more competently and will have less dependency and therefore less demand for dependency. The reforms that he has for Medicare are all geared towards creating more market incentives and saving a great deal of money. So you take his plan forward, you actually end up paying off the national debt, bringing spending down below 15% of GDP for the first time since, Eisenhower, and that's not a pipe dream. The House of Representatives has passed that. All but a handful of Republicans in the Senate have already voted for it once, and Romney has said that he'd cheerfully sign it. So we get past this next election. Now, is that as sharp a hair-turn, U-turn on the road to serfdom as we might like or be able to get? No, we can do better. But it moves us starting in the right direction, and there's an awful lot that can be done there. So I'm optimistic because there is a path to liberty that's in legislative form, actually. It's not in essay, haiku, thoughts about wouldn't it be nice if stuff. This is real, nuts and bolts, real liberty movement.
There have also been several, more than a few, significant rollbacks of major welfare states in other countries. Canada, about 15 years ago, had a budget debt, a national debt that was growing like ours, and they completely turned that around. New Zealand.
Again, a liberal government.
A liberal government. New Zealand, under a liberal government, in the 80s, under Roger Douglas, finance minister, massively deregulated their economy, opened it up to free trade, and downsized the welfare state. Sweden has downsized its welfare
and New
state.
Zealand prospered after
And
that.
New Zealand prospered, absolutely.
And then the people voted all those deregulators out.
Eternal vigilance, John.
You had one more example, did
It was the hobbits when they showed up.
I have to jump in and disagree, actually, though. I am very skeptical of the short term. I think the best we can hope for is a gridlock where we're not going to lose significant amounts of more liberty or significantly higher spending by the government. I don't trust Romney whatsoever. I don't think he has any limited government principles at all. I'm not saying I want this to be the case, but to a certain extent, I think it's okay to have Obama in the White House because it's rallied Tea Party opposition to what's going on that I don't think would have happened if the president had an R next to his name. And I think the 90s are sort of the best case scenario, perhaps, where we have a Democrat in the White House and a Republican-controlled Congress that don't get along with one another and so get very little done. So then just get us to 10, 20 years from now when we can start to really make changes.
No, we actually got major welfare reform in those years.
And I would just add, you also have Puerto Rico, where a governor let go 20,000 state workers. And when I interviewed him, he said, you got to do it quickly, like when you first are in power, like a Band-Aid, you rip it off quickly, and people don't like it, and he was very unpopular, but as with Reagan, they see the results, and they like the results. And his popularity is up some. We'll see what happens. I then looked for other examples of people who did that. Governor Engler of Michigan became popular.
Yep.
Mitch Daniels, perhaps, is a mixed record. And then I looked for others, and sadly, I didn't find many. And I'm not optimistic about Romney either. I really want to be so much. But the one time I heard him speak, he talked about, I'm going to shrink the state to 20% of GDP. It was 18% under Clinton. Couldn't we go there? But it says, I'm going to reduce the federal workforce by 10%. Great. But he's quick then to say, by attrition. Why does he have to say that? Is that politics? Maybe Grover knows, but that you can't offend the federal workforce. But that's not management. If you do it by attrition, the bad people stay and the good people leave. It's at GE, when it was a growth company and Jack Welch ran it before it became more of a parasite off government, he used to say, it's your job as a CEO to identify the 10% lowest performers and ease them out, or you're not doing your job. Okay.
Hi.
Yes.
First, I'm Pablo Velázquez from Francisco Marroquín University at Guatemala. First, I want to thank you, all of you, for the amazing work that you have been doing for the Liberty cause in the past years and now. I would like to ask you,
Just before you do, I want to say, for those of you who don't know it, this is UFM in Guatemala. It's this tiny, started by one guy who believed in liberty, a businessman, of course, who saw the regulators. It's created this pocket of liberty in Central America.
Thank you, John. I would like to ask you regarding the Occupy Wall Street and 15 de Mayo movement in Madrid. How can we, like, if we are in the liberty movement, how can we build bridges between these people that share some of our criticism to the current political system and to mercantilism, chronic capitalism? How we can turn bridges among them and us? How we can become, instead of enemies, we can become allies against this big threat that is big government?
So we've actually done a lot of work with Students for Liberty in reaching out to the Occupy movement when it was a really big thing across the country. Our student leaders, our campus coordinators, would take copies of the Morality of Capitalism, go to the different Occupy camps, and actually just start up conversations with these people, talking about the problems of crony capitalism, of the government bailing out big businesses, and forming a common alliance in their opposition to this. And it's really incredible when you talk to these people about what they really have a problem with. It's the same thing that we do. It's government intervention in the economy, bailing out losers. The only problem is they don't necessarily understand economics. They just need a bit of an education, and the solution being less government intervention in the economy rather than more. And so we had some Occupy movements that were really receptive to our ideas, some that weren't, but it all comes down to just having a conversation with them and forming that common understanding that you're on the same team with what you're trying to resolve, just we have a better solution than they do.
I would say they need more than a little education. They need a lot of it. That mic was working before.
I know that all of you are devotees of Ayn Rand. I know that all of you are devotees of Ayn Rand, but you know, you do know that Ayn Rand vehemently opposed libertarianism, the term libertarianism. And we all know why. She said, any struggle for liberty that doesn't have a philosophical base is going to be hopeless. And that if you wouldn't talk constantly about selfishness and constantly attack altruism, especially attack altruism, your efforts for liberty would be for naught. I do have a question. I'm going to ask it now. I hear about these soaring efforts of, you all talk about liberty and libertarianism. I know that's a title. How quickly is your struggle for liberty going to soar beyond its philosophical roots and soar beyond its really need to talk constantly about philosophy? Have you already soared beyond that or not? I know that's a leading question.
I think I'll start by saying I think Rand was wrong about that. I vehemently disagree with her in saying that libertarianism is opposed to objectivism or that you can't engage the political system without all the underlying philosophical bases in place. I think that's just misunderstanding social change, and I think we as objectivists need to be willing to be more open in saying Rand didn't get everything right. We can revise some of the things that she said and disagree with her and still be objectivists. So I think we need to, if we want to affect the political system, just be libertarian and start engaging the process that way, and we'll be very successful. That's what Students for Liberty has done. We're not an objectivist organization. I'm an objectivist, but we're a libertarian group.
My only criticism of libertarianism is that I think it overstates the case for a central government. But on the creating a liberty movement, not everybody has to be for liberty for the same reason. And the Leave Us Alone coalitions that I've helped organize here in DC and in 48 states, where you have around the table a bunch of people, all of whom vote for the candidate who will leave them alone on the issue that matters to them. There are guys who vote the Second Amendment who have what I consider rather odd views on the question of free trade with China. But they vote because they want their Second Amendment rights protected. They vote for the candidate who promises to leave them alone. Homeschoolers want to be left alone to educate and run their own children's lives. Various communities of faith want to be left alone to practice their own religion, and that's what they want to be left alone to do. And as long as we organize people and make sure they understand, you do understand that what you want out of this deal is to be left alone with your money, your kids, your faith, your business, your property, the thing that is most threatened by the government. And of course, as the government gets bigger, it threatens more people in more ways, which helps us organize. But you can have a whole bunch of people around the table who don't agree on many things. I mean, the guy who wants to make money all day looks across the table at the guy who wants to go to church all day and says, that's not how I spend my time, and they both look over at the guy who wants to fondle his guns all day. And it's not necessary that we agree how we spend our freedom. It's necessary in a political sense that we vote for the guy who stands or the lady who stands in the middle of the circle and says, I'm going to leave your guns alone, your kids alone, your money alone, your property alone, and then create a limited government to not threaten everybody in the room. So you can have a lot of people in the liberty movement who have a limited sense, we might think of what liberty means, but the part that matters to them, they care deeply about.
I think objectivism provides the best philosophical support for libertarianism, but I agree with what both of the other colleagues have said, that there's a lot of people, if we need, in order to have liberty, if we need to convert everybody to being an objectivist,
It's going to take longer.
it's going to take centuries. And so we made a conscious decision in starting Reason Magazine and then Reason Foundation that we would be classical liberal, secular, consistent with objectivism, but not explicitly objectivist, because we wanted to reach as broad an audience as possible for limited government, free markets, individualism, and a non-religious view toward what our society should be about and how it should be governed. And that's consistent with objectivism, but it's not, it doesn't require you to be an objectivist in order to enjoy Reason Magazine or watch Reason TV and so forth. And I think that is really, if we're trying to build a broad-based support for liberty, that's really important. At the same time, I'm proud to be a board member of the Atlas Society because I think objectivism really has a lot to offer, needs to be promoted. But I think it's more, in our lifetimes probably, it's going to be more of a niche market than broadly speaking, the pro-liberty movement.
Let's just do two more questions, one there and then one
John,
last
I
one.
have a question in the back here.
Hi, my name is Ryan Brezza. I'm 18 years old, and at first I was going to ask a trick question that if you could force everybody to read Atlas Shrugged, would you do it?
No.
But I actually
No, we'd tax them if they didn't.
But then I started realizing that that's exactly what the other side is doing. In school, throughout my entire school career, I read every socialist book from Grapes of Wrath to Death of a Salesman. And I just see, like, in the school system, it's full of liberals, the school board is full of liberal politicians, and kids are being just bombarded with liberal propaganda for the first 18 years of their lives. And I think by the time we get to them, it's a little too late. So how do we get conservatives into the school system to change this?
Well, first of all, I never read any of the books they told us we were supposed to read. So that didn't affect me. But I think we're at a breaking out point on liberalizing education that I always believed would happen someday, but I didn't understand why we kept banging on that dike and it didn't, break. We now have half the law just passed this year. Half the kids in Louisiana will have scholarships, vouchers to go to any school they want. Half the kids in Indiana, 100,000 kids now, new kids in Arizona. I mean, we've really, I think, opened that up. And the arguments against school choice, I mean, radical, complete school choice, go anywhere you want to go, especially the richest schools. The arguments against that were always fictitious, and they'd say, well, if you had that, they'll be harvesting organs in third grade or something. But now that we have big examples, tens of thousands of kids in Florida and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and hundreds of thousands of kids soon in Indiana and Louisiana, you're not going to be able in other states to make the case that complete parental choice in education is threatening or scary or problematic. I think that nothing stops us from this breakthrough to darn near everywhere getting it. And that's half of all state and local government, okay? You're in effect going to privatize half of all state and local government, I think in a decade and a half. This is Milton Friedman's observation about how central that was. The Friedman Foundation has been central to driving it in Indiana and several of his other statements. So rather than, I wouldn't spend any time trying to fix the post office. I'm much more interested in letting FedEx and UPS compete with the post office and closing it down. I mean, I'm all in favor of somebody who wants, I suppose, to try and make the DC school system work. But I think much more likely to succeed are all the efforts to create competitors and alternatives to the state-controlled government education system. So, I mean, this is a huge part of government, and it is falling apart, and that's a good thing.
Though I do want to infiltrate the post office, and of the 12 million kids who are now watching Stossel in the Classroom videos, most are in public high school still. So, until this happens. And I just want to close with one more question. It's funny, at all these meetings I go to, it's 80% male. The panel is all male. Yes, I know there are women here. I can see that. And there's some that have questions. I'm leading up to this, you know? Give me a break.
John, I have the solution.
Yes, but just before you get to it, but think how a few women have made such a difference in this movement. Ayn Rand, of course, Andrea Rich, who ran Laissez-Faire Books and who now runs Stossel in the Classroom, Virginia Postrel, who, in my mind, forgive me, Bob, was the best editor of Reason, who turned my brain around. It's the women who are better able to communicate to the dopes who don't get it. So last question from a woman here.
Hi, my name is Jasmine, and I'm a student here at the conference. And my question is actually sort of related to a couple back, sort of the, I don't want to say disconnect, but the difference between recruiting sort of an objectivist specific movement versus a broader base of liberty. And as you know, Ayn Rand was an atheist and really believed in reason-based. And I was wondering your thoughts on religion in the broader sense of recruiting liberty and understanding the individual's right to their own religion versus a more focused objectivist viewpoint, which holds that there, in her view at least, was not really any room for religion and mystical sort of based ideology. And I was wondering, do you find that there's a disconnect between, you know, the two, and is there any room there or not?
I have nothing wise to add to you.
I think a couple of things. One, when you're up against the communist Polish government, the Catholic Church is your ally. Okay, I mean, so so there's an interesting question of sometimes people organize through religious impulses where it's not inconsistent with liberty necessarily. It's just the only entity available to you. If you didn't like the Egyptian government, who did you organize with? One of the things that I thought was interesting, I just was chatting with Hernando de Soto, the apostle of property rights, and he told me something I had never seen anywhere. It's a map of, you know, the guy, Mohammed Bouazizi, the guy who burned himself to death in Tunisia. There were 41 people who did that. Not one, 41 all across North Africa, and almost to a person they happened after they'd been expropriated, their small business or their property. This Arab Spring explosion was in reaction to violation of people's property rights. And so I mean, it can get hijacked by people arguing everybody needs to go to church more often, but I think we need to look at all political movements, find the piece of it that's rooted in love of liberty and fear of statism, and work with that, like embers, blow on it and work to build that, because you can misunderstand what everybody's shouting about, particularly if you don't speak the language that they're talking on some foreign television thing, and reach in and figure out how to do that. The question of, has anyone ever stepped away from statism? I would argue the one foreign aid thing the United States, two foreign aid things the United States ever did right was after World War II, they took what Hernando de Soto's approach towards Japan and protected the property rights of all the farmers there and got rule of law up from property rights. Okay. Now, after that, we just started throwing money at everybody in Tanzania to make them rich. You know, instead of taking the success we had. The other good thing we did was we cut Taiwan and South Korea off from foreign aid, and they decided to get rich on their own. But the movement towards property rights internationally, I think that can be an important part of extending liberty, rule of law, up, and even some of these political movements that appear to be religiously organized because that's the only place to organize in a society outside of the state, may well be motivated by something other than the religious impulse.
And in terms of the relationship between objectivism and liberty, I think at one level, it's not going to be so much of an issue moving forward because fewer and fewer young people are religious. It's becoming less of an issue, and I don't think that's just an issue of their age. I think that's a generational difference, that more people are either agnostic, atheist, or they're at least breaking away from standardized, organized religion. But even when we're talking about people who are religious and how do we get them to start thinking about objectivism more, I think, again, this requires us to be more open-minded as objectivists and say there's a conversation to be had as to whether the existence of God is something that can coincide with the rest of the objectivist philosophy. It's not something to say, you believe in God, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. We can't have that attitude. It should rather be, okay, if you're objectivist in everything else in your life, or you're interested in these ideas, but you still believe in God, you can still be objectivist. We can still have conversations about this and debate the merits of that. But we have to be willing to have that conversation, which I don't think has happened enough within the objectivist movement for that to really take off before.
On that note, Alexander McCobin, Grover Norquist, Bob Poole, thank you. David Kelly has more treats in store.
All right, just one additional unscripted moment. I have Duncan Scott here, who is has worked on the Atlas Shrugged movie and most recently Part 2.
Starred in it.
And starred in it. And I thought, since we have Grover here, perhaps the two of you could share a reminiscence of your days on the street as derelict winos, appreciating the failures of the welfare state.
Thank you, David. It was kind of a last-second thing that was done, and Grover was put into a cameo scene in the film, and they recruited me on very short notice to, we're both homeless people, all complete with smudged faces and beat-up clothes. And
I was disappointed to see how little work it took for them to turn me into.
Yeah, I said, the makeup people put dirt on me, and I said, what about my hair? Doesn't it need to be messed up? And they said, no, you look like a homeless person. But I was disappointed that the wine that we were drinking out of a paper bag was not real. I mean, it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning when we finished up. I think we could have used it. And I remember you had just flown in on a late flight and were really tired. And we had amazing conversations at 1 o'clock in the morning with is Jason here? Our Hank Reardon? Okay, well, Jason and Grover and I having political conversations as homeless people at 1 o'clock in the morning.
In between takes.
In between takes, yes, of course. But a very memorable experience. Thank you, Grover.
Don't blink, you may miss our scene.
So, another reason to see Atlas Shrugged Part 2 in October. Thanks, everyone. All right. We're at the end, folks, and the chairman of our board, Jay LePere, has a few final thoughts.
Thank you, John and Bob, Grover, Alexander. I thought that was a terrific session. I'm going to try to cover a couple of things, and I won't be too long. I want to cover what we stand for at the Atlas Society, discuss one key initiative that we've had as an organization, and then talk a little bit about what each of us can do to help advance liberty with respect to the Atlas Society. The optimism is mixed. I mean, we see good trends, and then we see bad trends. I think it's fair to say that liberty and freedom are under siege from crony capitalism in a deeper way than it has ever been. The simple idea that you put $3 trillion in the U.S. trough and then you expect the pigs to behave is simply not realistic. We know that. But Rand had it right, and when you look at what we stand for, she understood way back then that it was a culture that was driven by envy. She identified secular egalitarianism, even back then, as an embodiment of the altruist collectivist ethics. I don't know if she actually predicted that global environmentalism could become another embodiment of that. It was probably too bizarre to imagine that could get to the traction it's gotten. But what do we stand for? We promote open objectivism, philosophy of reason, individualism, achievement, and freedom that Rand founded. Those are the basic ideas. We make the moral case for individual rights, limited government, and capitalism, and as has been well articulated up here, just the idea of leave us alone, laissez-nous-faire, just let us run our own lives and let us pursue our own happiness. The Atlas Society has been an organization that had a terrific senior team producing a lot of great content, but we've also not had the kind of trend lines that we wanted for a long time. We've not been growing at the rates that we'd actually been declining from the highs that we had years ago. And the board, I think we have a number of board members here. I'd like, I think we have, well, David obviously is here, John Agliora. I'll just ask you all to stand. Walter, who was just up a second ago, Frank Brooks, and Bob Poole are board members that are here. We identified that we needed, We had a terrific team, but we really didn't have the leadership. So we identified over 2 years ago the idea that we wanted to get a new CEO, someone that would bring the kind of initiative, the kind of intelligence, and the kind of managerial skill and background to help us align the powerful talent we have to help get our resources placed in the way we need them. And I'm delighted to report to you tonight that our board, in our last board meeting some 3 weeks or so ago, voted to approve Aaron Day as our new CEO. And I'd like Aaron in the back to please stand up. Here's Aaron. Oh, here's Aaron. Here's Aaron. Aaron will have, I'm sort of hijacking this a little bit. Aaron will have comments at the closing session, and I would be making these comments then. It's just that I'm not going to be here, so it's hard to do it remotely. But Aaron brings a deep skill. He's a serial entrepreneur. He has a tremendous facility with what I'll call modern technology and media. And he understands how to organize a conversation in a way that brings out the best in a team. And those skills, I think, are going to do well for us. And we are just delighted, Aaron. You began working with us as COO about, I'm not sure whether it was 18 months or so ago or 12 months ago, but it has been from that day our organization has gotten considerably better. And the seminar you're seeing that we're putting on now is heavily influenced by Aaron's work. Obviously, Will and others in the team did great work too, but Aaron was the architect to redesign this. So Aaron, we are again happy and grateful to have you. And we actually have a win-win out of this. David is an extraordinary talent and intellect, and to have him, I don't know if you've ever seen those Doonesbury cartoons where you take your most talented and you move them up into management and totally choke off the production system. That would be a little bit of the case of terribly underutilizing David's talent, because here he is, creating great product, doing a fantastic scholarly research that probably no one else on the planet could do as well, and we having do stuff that IQ guys like I could be doing. So it's a great thing to have David back in our Chief Intellectual Officer spot, and he'll be dedicating a lot more of his time to that substantive work. So David, we're delighted with that as well. I'm going to just close with with a comment about, I don't know if I can find those notes. Sorry. If each of us, we've talked about the role of objectivism in this political movement, but think of how quickly the libertarian game gets derailed without a rights-based foundation. So we can talk about sort of full buy-in objectivism, but it's very different when you're making consequentialist arguments about what works best versus if you're approaching a problem from the moral high ground of liberty. Much of our discussion is founded in that basic, and we provide that moral base. I want each of us to reflect for just a minute on how powerfully these ideas have affected us in our lives. I was a deeply religious, conservative Republican, very statist-oriented when I first read Rand in college. And I immediately became convinced that she was right about everything except religion. And it took me about 10 years to get over that. So I don't think our best game for many people is starting with, you have to buy in. We know people learn and think independently. They learn and grow independently. Each of us probably had a journey that was something like that. We can be part of enabling that journey for more people, not just for ourselves and not just for build great life for ourselves, for our families, whatever, but also to spread that and to build a culture based on reason and freedom and achievement and responsibility. And most importantly, the idea of self-pride and the idea that we are proud of our achievements and what we do, which is rare in this culture. So I encourage each of you, some of you may not have the financial means to support us deeply, but you do have the means to spread the virus. You do have the means to get friends to engage. You do have the means to invite others to come to these events. And you do have the means to get everybody to get out and watch Atlas Shrugged and start to spread that. So with that in mind, I say we need your financial support, but we need your energy, we need your activism. And I hope you have a great session here, and then I hope we can really make this a year where we get a tipping point to energize this movement. So thank you, and hope you have a great evening.